navigating and accompanying those who are struggling with infertility. Today on The Simple Truth, we consecrate everything to the Sacred Heart of Jesus through the Immaculate Heart of Mary and the pure, strong, chaste heart of Saint Joseph. I'm your host, Jim Havens, and our guest today is Ann Koshute. She is co-founder and executive director of Springs in the Desert. Springs in the Desert accompanies those struggling with infertility by offering a place of respite and solidarity where they can know God's love for them and discover his unique call to fruitfulness. They have a podcast, events, small groups, lots of resources and support. You can find them over at springsinthedesert.org. Very blessed to have Ann Koshute here with us today. Ann, welcome to The Simple Truth. How are you today?
Oh, thanks so much, Jim. I'm great, and I'm so grateful to be with you.
Yes, thank you so much for being here. And maybe just, I guess, start with the personal story of how you began to go forward in this work. Any background you want to share with us, and yeah, just the basic background of it all.
Yeah, sure. So I think Springs in the Desert was founded kind of out of necessity, kind of out of personal necessity. And I think very often that's where God sort of meets us in our difficulties and our challenges. And then sometimes that's where he calls us to act. And I certainly wasn't expecting that. I certainly was never expecting to start a ministry. But I guess it began with my husband and I getting married, meeting in our early 40s and getting married. Not at that time because we were career driven or afraid of commitment, but that's just simply when the Lord brought us together. And I'm so grateful for that. But, you know, we wanted to have a family. We wanted to have children. I guess sort of naively, we thought, well, we're older, so it might take a little bit longer, but of course it will happen, right? Because we're good Catholics and we're doing things the right way. But month after month, we were disappointed, and that disappointment eventually turned into years. And my husband and I have been married for 14 years now, again, which I'm really grateful for. But for that whole time, the cross that God has given to us has taken the shape of infertility. And early on, it was really difficult. I very strongly identified, I guess, with infertility without actually ever using that word. I think for the first couple of years, I was sort of in denial about it. We were just having trouble. It just wasn't as easy. I didn't want to think, even though I was going through treatments and we were charting, I just didn't want to think that it was real somehow. And during that time, the course of those first couple of years of marriage, I went to a conference and I reconnected with an old friend, Kimberly Henkel. And she was also a graduate of the John Paul II Institute for Studies on Marriage and Family in Washington, D.C. She was actually a year behind me at school. And so we were at this conference, we reconnected, and she opened up by sharing that she and her husband were having difficulty conceiving. And she was the first woman that I spoke with who was going through the same thing. And she began to share these different emotions and feelings that she was having. She felt in some ways disconnected from the church. She wondered about her relationship with God. What was he doing or not doing in their marriage? She felt alone. She felt sometimes jealous and angry, and all of these things that I was feeling too. But I thought I was the only one. And I thought I was a terrible person for feeling those things, that I was a bad Catholic when I heard a pregnancy announcement and I felt suddenly angry or jealous. And so over the course of a couple of years, we were just in conversation. We were kind of like a support group of two. And eventually she was asked to write an article for the online journal of the Institute. And it was about infertility. And she said, why don't you write it with me? And that's sort of how it started. We wrote this article And then she said, if it's going to be published, we should probably have a website. And I just kind of looked at her and I was like, what do you mean we should have a website? I mean, what are we going to put on it? And she said, well, we'll figure it out. And so we did, and we figured it out. It started with a blog, and we wrote very infrequently. But when we did, we started to get a response, especially from women. And they were saying, nobody expresses these kinds of feelings. Nobody else has shared these things that I've been feeling deep in my heart and in my soul. And so they began connecting with what we were saying. And then we thought, well, I guess we're not alone after all. There are other people out there who are also feeling the way that we are, and perhaps not getting the kind of pastoral support and accompaniment that they need. And so eventually we were able to start to assemble a team. And now we have a beautiful team of 6 women, a few husbands. We have a number of contributors who write for our blog and do other things to help us to create more resources for this community that we have built. And so we were very unwitting founders of a ministry. In some ways, I think, at least I went kicking and screaming, no, I don't want to be part of a ministry. But that's just exactly where God led us.
Yes. Yeah. Amazing. What a beautiful story. We're talking with Ann Koshute. She is co-founder and executive director of Springs in the Desert. And what a website it is. What a great resource. springsinthedesert.org. Want to highly recommend this website as a resource that needs to be promoted, needs to be out there. I believe every parish should have this website on their website, a link to this website for those that are experiencing infertility, so they know where to go, so they do have someone that they can talk to, that they can listen to and hear the patterns, the various things that are so commonly experienced with respect to infertility. There's always going to be uniqueness, but there's a lot that we can know about what someone deals with when they're facing this struggle of infertility and how to best navigate this. The church gives us some beautiful points on this in the catechism, and then to flesh this out with a ministry that is really going to that presents this in such a way to really reach people where they're at and help them to move forward, to get to a place of greater fruitfulness in spite of the suffering that they're experiencing. Just so needed, so incredible. So again, springsinthedesert.org. Maybe if everybody can just maybe give it a little plug to their pastor or to their parish in some way and say, hey, can we just get this up on the website, or have the website or the website listed in the bulletin or something like that, some way to promote it, to let everyone out there know if they are struggling with infertility, if they are not really sure where to turn, if they could use some support and resources, they could be connected quite easily in this way. So Ann, as we unpack some of this today, there's so much here. So again, that's why I really want to drill down on the website so people know it. They can go there and learn as much as they want. But can you share with us first, I guess even just when we talk about infertility, you lay it out, you explain there are different kinds and types of infertility. Can you share some of that with us? Maybe we can just sort of get a little basic education on this today.
Sure, of course. And I have to say that when I started out with all of this, I wasn't even aware of all the different kind of facets that there are to infertility. And so for myself and my husband, we have primary infertility. We have never been pregnant, at least not that we know of. And so many of the people who come to our community, the women, the couples who come to us, have never been pregnant. And that's a unique and painful cross, because that experience of pregnancy is, such a beautiful part of bringing children into the world. Then there is secondary infertility. This is something that I had never heard of until I was in this ministry, and that is when a couple has one or more children but cannot continue to grow their family as large as they would want. And this is, not to compare crosses, right? But I think for those in our community who deal with secondary infertility, there is this kind of added layer because they can feel sort of guilty or ashamed that they want more children and are not able to have them. They can sometimes feel reticent to come to a small group or on a retreat, or if they do, they feel like they can't share that perhaps they have one child because they don't want to hurt anyone else, anyone in the group who doesn't have children. And they also might be feeling guilt of, I'm not grateful enough, perhaps, for the child that I have. And so it's much more layered and complex than it might seem, at first.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah, and it's always it's such an important topic too for all of us, whether we have had experience of infertility ourselves or not, because we sure are going to know people that are experiencing infertility, and how do we best love them in this? What do we say to them? What do we not say, right? Sometimes with secondary infertility, you might hear people tell you something like, hey, well, at least you have a beautiful family already, and that type of thing, which again, well-meaning, but maybe not super helpful what that person needs to hear in the moment. But that's why we need to talk about this. That's why we need some education in this. So we're blessed to have Ann Koshute with us to talk with us today. I'm sorry, Ann Koshute. We're going to be right back. springsinthedesert.org. Stay tuned. Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our guest today, Ann Koshute. She is co-founder and executive director of Springs in the Desert, springsinthedesert.org. She holds a Master of Theological Studies from the Pontifical John Paul II Institute for Studies on Marriage and Family at the Catholic University of America. And also, she and her husband Keith live in central Pennsylvania, are Byzantine Catholics who married in 2011. So keep them in your prayers as well. But talking about navigating infertility, accompanying those who are navigating infertility today. Very blessed to have Ann with us. We're going to get right back to her in a moment. But first, do want to let you know that if you are buying or selling a home, there's an easy way to help the Station of the Cross at the same time. It's called Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life has 1,400 experienced, morally grounded agents in the U.S. and Canada. Visit realestateforlife.org to find a Christ-centered, experienced realtor near you. And don't forget to mention the Station of the Cross. All right, back to Ann Koshute here. Ann, I think we left off when the break hit. You were sharing with us some of the kinds of infertility. So primary, secondary, what else?
Well, generally, it's thought that a third of the time when there's infertility, it is an issue with the woman. A third of the time, it's with the man. And then the other third of the time, there could be an issue with both spouses. And so male factor infertility is something I think that is not talked about. It's certainly not as well, I think, studied as female infertility. Certainly there are fewer interventions for men. And so, that's a delicate area. I think, I'm not a man, but I think, I have a husband and there are a lot of men in my life, and they are generally people who want to provide and protect and want to solve problems. And so when the issue is with them, I think that's, again, another layer of complexity to this cross and the grief, and how we can process and manage it, not just individually, but together as a couple, because this is a shared cross. It's not the problem, so to speak, of one or the other spouse. Then there are different diagnoses that particularly a woman might have that will make it unlikely or impossible that she will be able to conceive. Things like polycystic ovarian syndrome, endometriosis, some diagnoses that will mean a hysterectomy. which of course, takes away a woman's fertility permanently. And then finally, in our ministry, we acknowledge menopause, which is not an infertility diagnosis. This is a normal, natural part of a woman's reproductive life. But if you have suffered with infertility at all or experienced miscarriage, and now as a woman, you're entering into menopause, that can really bring with it a resurgence of grief, because now you see this window permanently closing. And so it can be very complicated. If you're trying to conceive every month when a woman gets her period, it's so hard, right? And you in a way curse that period, right? Because it means that you're not pregnant. And then when a woman enters into menopause, there's sort of a mourning for that period, right? Because the lack of it means that there's no longer a possibility to conceive. And so again, just, so many different layers of complexity. It's not as simple as, oh, you're having a hard time conceiving or you're not able to conceive. And then, of course, I'm sure we'll talk about all the different emotions that come along with that, and then the way that other people might respond to us when we're carrying this cross.
Mm-hmm. Yes, a lot to get into today. We have Ann Koshute with us. And we're going to open up the phone lines in a little bit. At the end of this segment, I think I'll put the number out there. So if you do have a question that you really want to get in today, you'll be able to ask Ann when we put that number out at the end of the segment. So stay tuned for that. But Ann, can you explain to us, it's very important that people understand, especially we want to get this message to our bishops, to our pastors, why is infertility an especially important, urgent pastoral issue in our time right now?
Yeah, because there are people in our pews who are really suffering. Infertility, I think, the way that I like to explain the experience, especially to people who have not had that as part of their story, is that it is almost like hiding in plain sight. So we feel sort of hidden. We feel isolated. You pull into a parking lot on a Sunday and you're parked next to 6 and 8 passenger vans, and you're seeing, pews filled with children, which is beautiful. It's wonderful. And it's necessary. It's necessary for the church. It's necessary for the world and the continuation of humanity, right? But it can make those of us who carry this cross feel so inadequate, feel like we're not kind of doing our part. And so we might feel isolated even within our parish family. We might want to almost hide within our own parish family, right? We're in and out. People in our community tell us about going to the 7:30 a.m. Mass because all the old people are there, or sitting near the door so that they can leave quickly. They're not going over to the parish center for hospitality between masses because they don't want to get questions about their family or feel like people are making assumptions about their family size or the lack of children. But at the same time, we feel like we sort of stick out like a sore thumb, right? You go to church every week and it's just you and your husband, you and your wife in the pew. And so you feel like the spotlight is on you. And then on days like Mother's Day, you feel that spotlight even more intensely when Father might say, all the mothers stand up now to receive the blessing. And I have to tell you, and I want especially our clergy to know this, that there are people in your pews who don't go to church on Mother's Day because it's so painful. And that doesn't mean that we should throw all the moms overboard and we shouldn't celebrate them. But I think the church is a mother, and as a mother, she can do things like Mother's Day differently, and in ways that at least acknowledge and are sensitive toward those who are carrying this cross. And so I think it's especially important for our clergy, for our priests and our deacons and our bishops to understand that you might think that it's not touching your parish because no one has come to you and said, Father, this is what we're carrying. But more than likely, they're not coming to you because they are afraid. They might feel ashamed and embarrassed. They don't know what you're going to say. And so there are a lot of people in our pews who are hurting. There are marriages that are hurting, and they need to be supported and uplifted and affirmed just in the goodness of their sacrament.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's a lot that could be said as well regarding the time we're in, where we do see also, so people that are struggling with infertility, various things I want to actually ask you about and get into sort of the common ways that it impacts families, the grief, the jealousy and anger, the shame that can rise up. But so in this tender time of struggling with these various experiences, then comes the world with its gravely immoral temptation to these artificial reproductive technologies that really do damage and are not things that people should be doing, but they're being pushed and they're right and dangling in front of them. Anything that you want to speak to that today? Again, this could be a topic for multiple shows to dive into, but what comes to mind as you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a good point. And of course, it's top of mind now, right? Because, we're in a political climate where things like IVF, in vitro fertilization, have really become, this sort of political football. And so, yeah, that makes it even more difficult for the couple who is struggling with infertility. There was a recent Pew Research study just this year asking Catholics a whole bunch of questions. And one of them was about IVF, in vitro fertilization. And they found that 83% of US Catholics said that the church should allow IVF. And I think what's most interesting, and again, these kinds of surveys, you have to be careful. You have to take them somewhat with a grain of salt, right? But I think it's really instructive that 71% of weekly mass goers think that the church should allow couples to have recourse to IVF if they're having trouble conceiving. And I think that that's a really important number for us to keep in mind, and to remember that we can't face this kind of issue, the deep problems with artificial reproductive technologies like IVF, among others, the deep moral and ethical and spiritual problems, but also to identify the real pain that couples are going through that can cause even faithful Catholics, even some that might be reasonably well-formed, to turn to things like IVF, because that industry sort of puts it out as the promise of kind of an easy answer. IVF does not solve infertility. It makes a woman pregnant, but it doesn't get to the root of why she's unable to conceive. And I'll say that even in my sort of darkest, most desperate times when we were trying to conceive, it crossed my mind, why can't we use this? Because of God's grace and that incredible formation I had at the JP2 Institute, that wasn't more than a fleeting thought. But I think as a church and pastorally, we have to, when we're walking with couples, not look at them immediately with judgment. Oh my goodness, you're about to do something immoral, but to go a little bit deeper and to kind of see what's driving them. What is the grief? Where is the sort of lack of support? Where's the lack of understanding about what IVF and some of these other technologies really are, and the damage that they do to marriages, to our bodies, to relationships, the way that they commodify the child, not intentionally on the part of the couple who is hurting and desires the great good of a child. And so in those ways, I think we can come around these couples and help them to make truly pro-life decisions around their fertility.
Yes, springsinthedesert.org. We're going to be back with Ann Koshute in just a moment. And if you have a question on any of this topic today of navigating infertility, accompanying those with infertility, who are walking with infertility, any question at all, feel free to give a call right now, 1-877-511-5483. That's 1-877-511-5483. We are very blessed to have such a resource as Ann with us. And again, the resource of the website, so vital, springsinthedesert.org. A great podcast there, events, small groups, lots of resources for support. We're going to dive in a little deeper when we get back. Stay tuned. Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with Ann Koshute. She is co-founder and executive director of Springs in the Desert, springsinthedesert.org. If you have a question that you'd like to call in with today, now's the time to give that call, 1-877-511-5483. That's 1-877-511-5483. Going to get back with Ann in just a moment here. But first, don't forget about iCatholic Mobile for your mobile phone needs. When you subscribe to iCatholic Mobile, you do help fund the Station of the Cross. Check out iCatholic Mobile, iCatholicMobile.com. All right. And so the ways that infertility impacts families, very helpful to think this through. You present this beautifully. What can you share with us about the ways that infertility impacts families?
I mean, first of all, it obviously impacts the marriage. And so, we are men and women, so we grieve differently. We approach these kinds of challenges differently. So you're having to navigate that. Then whatever we bring from our families of origin, right? Do we come from a family where emotions were kind of welcomed to be expressed, or was it the kind of thing where we had to keep things a little bit more buttoned up? And so in a marriage, there's that navigating kind of each other. And, there are so many different factors that can come in. I blame myself. I blame my husband. He blames me. I wonder if I should have married him. Would he have a family by now, if not for me? Would she have a family if I divorced her? These are the kinds of things that people bring to us in our community, the kinds of conflicts that can arise. But I will say that there are also opportunities with really any kind of suffering or challenge that we face. And particularly with this one, it is something that can really bring a couple closer together. And so as we share about the difficulties and the challenges, I want to always try to bring in, these opportunities, the grace and the kind of giftedness that can come from this suffering. But of course, if you're in the thick of it, you can't really see anything that looks like a gift in this kind of suffering, right? So that takes time and, working through it. And then, of course, when you work out from there, I mean, there's a relationship with God, and I mean, we can feel like maybe God has abandoned us, or perhaps because of the way that we lived our life previously, because of our sins, maybe God is withholding this gift from us. And so, it's spiritual warfare, Jim. Like, this is a place where the devil really can kind of zone in and begin to tell us lies about who we are and about our relationship with God. And so it's very important for us as couples to pray, to have recourse to the sacraments, to have a good spiritual father, spiritual mother, to help us along with this. But I would also say that spiritually, there can be some, this will sound like a strong word, but there can be some spiritual damage done, right? We have people who, again, very well-meaning, will offer, say this prayer, try that novena, go make that pilgrimage. And we can begin to become superstitious about prayer and our relationship with God or our relationship with the saints. And so we can think, well, my gosh, I've been praying to Saint Gianna forever. Does she just not like me? Isn't she listening to me? If a prayer doesn't work, so to speak, we can start to think that maybe we didn't pray hard enough, or for whatever reason, our prayer just wasn't accepted. And so that's something I think is important for your listeners. If there's any clergy who are listening, I'm not saying discourage people from praying or from praying for the gift of a child. Yes, please do that. But I would say, be careful in how you present that to a couple, to an individual who comes to you and is carrying this cross, because it can be so easy to turn it into something kind of superstitious, or to feel like it's something we need to earn from God. Right? It's a gift we need to earn, and that if we don't work hard enough, he's not going to give us this gift.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Ann Koshute is with us, springsinthedesert.org. Yeah, so wonderful that you are able to understand things and with such depth, to be able to go into the heart and speak to what people are dealing with, much of which is because you've experienced this yourself, mm-hmm. and you've been able to be very self-reflective about that experience, and now you're sharing the fruits from that in such a powerful way. Just so awesome. And so there's a couple things that you presented. I watched one of your presentations that I thought was so good. One, where you, I thought all of it is so good, but a couple things jumped out to me in particular. One is based on, similar to what you were just talking about the spiritual combat, the lies about our identity, that can be so damaging. And you have this line in there that is extremely helpful. What a rescue this is for so many. Infertility is a circumstance, not an identity. Can you maybe just speak to that for a moment?
Yeah, thank you so much for seeing that, and I'm so glad that it really kind of rang a bell in you. It's so important. Early on in our marriage, we were visiting my husband's family, and a neighbor came, and I had never met her before, and she asked the normal question, "Do we have children?" And I was pretty raw. It was probably only maybe a year or so into our marriage. It was pretty raw, but I answered. I had a kind of list of different answers that I would utilize, and whichever one I pulled out at that time, conveyed the fact that we don't have children. And I'll never forget that she looked at me like right in the eyes, and she said, "Well, which one of you is the problem?" And I immediately, first of all, I wanted to fall through the floor. And I immediately identified as problem. And so for our ministry, we are very careful about the language that we use. So we will not say, "I am an infertile woman," or "we're an infertile couple." Sometimes it gets cumbersome because we use a lot of words, carrying the cross of infertility or struggling with infertility, things like that. But we think that it is important because we can so easily take on that identity of this cross that we carry. And that can make us believe that we are infertile in the sense that we're dry, we're barren, there's no possibility for life to come from us or from our marriage. And that's absolutely a lie from the devil. Doesn't take away the fact that this cross is difficult, that it's hard, that it's sad, that it brings up all these emotions, but it doesn't define us, and it doesn't define our marriage either. And I think that is an incredibly important message to get out there, and can be hard for some people I think to understand, I once shared this with a doctor, a wonderful NAPRO doctor, who asked me about having, children. And I said that we don't have any. And, he kind of lowered his chin and, pouted his lip a little bit and said, oh, like it was very sad. And it is sad. But I said to him, my husband and I have found so many ways to be fruitful in our marriage. And it's been a great blessing. And so that's what we want to convey to people, that yes, infertility is sad. Yes, if you are having difficulty conceiving, or if it turns out that you never receive that gift of children, that doesn't define you or your marriage. And that's not a measure of your holiness or a measure of the goodness of the sacrament of marriage.
Yes, awesome. And springsinthedesert.org. One of the other things that jumped out to me was it seems that your goal is to really meet people to where they're at, but then bring them along to the point of fruitfulness in carrying this cross of infertility. And that fruitfulness can be so powerful, so beautiful, but there is a process here. So I guess anything that you want to say about first about that process, and maybe any instruction you can help us with if we, when we are speaking to somebody, to be able to meet them where they're at, but still have an eye towards, the fruitfulness, the goodness that can come out of the suffering when we really suffer well.
Yeah, that's so important. Such a good point. One of the things that we say, we have a lot of taglines at Springs in the Desert, but they're not just taglines. I think they're really important. And one of them is that we focus on Christ, not on conception. And that's very intentional for our ministry. And I think it is very distinctive among other ministries that deal with infertility, because we're not the place that you come to find out about treatments and charting and diets and all of those things, all of which is very important. But we want to be a place where you can kind of jump off that hamster wheel for a little while and focus in on acknowledging the grief and the other emotions that you're going through right now, and to begin to really look to Christ at this time. The Lord asks us only for today. We can so easily live in the past. What if I had had that surgery? What if I hadn't done this or that, or made this or that choice? Would things be different? Or we project all the way into the future. What's going to happen? Is this ever going to happen for us? But the Lord asks us only for today, only to be present to Him and to ourselves and to each other for today. And so we want to invite couples, while they're still trying, while they might still be grieving and walking this path, to see where the Lord is with them today. Where is He calling them to be fruitful today? And I think that fruitfulness begins in the marriage itself. And I think this is one of the ways ultimately that we can witness to those couples who do have children, that it's so important for us to care for the sacrament, to care for each other. So we pour into each other, not in a selfish or self-serving way, but in a generous way, right? We give life to each other in our marriage. And I think when we do that, when we are attentive to each other, when we're generous and loving and kind and do for each other, that will naturally begin to flow out into the world in all kinds of different ways that God will bring about fruit, unique, unexpected, maybe not quite the ones that we wanted or that we hoped for, but nonetheless real and very necessary in the world. And so I think the first place where the fruitfulness must be cultivated, and this is a daily thing, and this is every marriage, no matter if you have 0 children or if you are like my husband's parents and had 16 children. There's not a sort of quota on fruitfulness. We're all called to give life. We're all called to bring Christ into the world. And so I think in that way, difficult as it might be to hear for some who are listening, who are in the thick of it, and they are really tender and struggling, you're a sign of contradiction. You're a witness to the good of marriage for the church and for the world.
Yes, yeah, beautiful. And going back to our true identity, that we can know who we are and be rightly oriented then to deal with everything else, sons and daughters of the living God in Jesus Christ, sons and daughters of the Father, right? Temples of the Holy Spirit. This is who we are. This is what we're made for, and everything is to flow from there. So yeah, the identity is not infertility. That's a circumstance. That's a difficult thing to deal with for sure. But you're dealing with it as sons and daughters of the living God, right? So that, I think, helps to better orient us. We're going to be back with more on fruitfulness when we get back. Stay tuned. Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our guest today, Ann Koshute, co-founder and executive director of Springs in the Desert, springsinthedesert.org. Final segment here, down the stretch we come. And as we do, we've covered so much ground here. And just to share, I know if you follow the show, you've probably heard some of my story in the past, and also my wife, Becky, who has joined us from time to time. And so, we have struggled with secondary infertility, and the struggle of that, and learning, okay, how do we navigate this? And part of our story has been then finding fruitfulness in being able to help out with respite care, which turned into then foster care, which now we're preparing, God willing, for adoption. Pray for us. Please keep us in your prayers. But what a beautiful unfolding this has all been, and certainly difficult. But there again, this is the nature of the cross, right? We're all going to have sufferings, and as we unite ourselves to our Lord Jesus in those sufferings, He brings good out of it, and we can participate with His grace to bring good out of it. I mean, it is so beautiful and so awesome. What a witness to the reality of Jesus and His Catholic Church when we see how this unfolds. And the fruit may be different than what you want. I want it to be this fruit. I want to see this fruit. But and I think this is great to speak to too. I think in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, when we see some great teaching about infertility and how to navigate it, how to understand it, and how to go forward, it's under the heading of the gift of a child. And if we keep that truth in mind, that every child is a gift, none of us is owed any child. What a beautiful gift. What an incredible gift. At the same time, though, if a gift is not given, we don't get angry at the giver of the gift for not giving us something. It's sort of, it just shows, I think, we can easily be kind of soaking in a culture of, a child is something that I'm owed, or this is how it's going to be, and it's our will. And look, the model of Jesus Himself, he went to the cross. He took the cross upon Himself. He offered it in love of us. So there's a great mystery here that we're called, that we're caught up in for good reason and for great reason. And so to say yes to that and just continue to, I think the temptation in all suffering is to turn our hearts away from God in that suffering. But the right move to make is actually all the more turn our hearts to Him and allow Him to pour His grace out through that suffering. And again, it doesn't necessarily take away the difficulty in the moment, but to let Him have His way it is going to be a beautiful unfolding. And there is this this sister organization to Springs in the Desert called Springs of Love. I just want to read a brief portion on this, and then Ann, please comment. But it says here, Springs of Love is a sister organization of Springs in the Desert, an apostolate that accompanies those struggling with infertility by offering a place of respite and solidarity where they can know God's love for them and discover his unique call to fruitfulness. Springs of Love serves both Catholics struggling with infertility as well as those who are not, in order to raise awareness of the need for loving families for the over 400,000 children in foster care and countless children in need around the world. I know on the website there they offer great resources for discernment, something with a great need like that. Probably everybody ought to prayerfully discern maybe what they might be called to in the midst of this. And so some resources for discernment seem incredibly helpful. Again, it's called Springs of Love. And can you share more with us?
Yeah, so Springs of Love, as you said, is our sister ministry, and it was actually founded by Kimberly Henkel, who is the co-founder of Springs in the Desert, who, together with her husband, formed their beautiful family through fostering and adoption. And so, yeah, there are amazing resources on there. Springs of Love is forming chapters all over the country so that communities in the parish can support families who are discerning or who are taking up the call to foster care and to adoption. So I think, you mentioned that discernment, which is so important. I think, one of the things that we talk about at Springs in the Desert is the fact that every marriage has a mission, right? And that requires discernment. That requires prayer. So it requires communicating with God and communicating together with our spouse. And it also entails a kind of reevaluation. Where are we right now? What season are we in? What's our capability? What's our capacity? And so adoption, fostering, even as you mentioned, respite care, are ways of fruitfulness that can be discerned not just by couples who are struggling with infertility, but by every Catholic couple, any Catholic couple who, has the means or might be feeling called to that. And so I think discernment is really key. And that self-reflection and the reflection on the marriage and where we are, where might God be calling us right now? I will also say, though, as a caution, because you had mentioned, what can people say, or maybe what shouldn't they say when a couple is struggling with infertility? It can be easy, I think, to throw out solutions to people. And part of that is because of our own discomfort with suffering, right? And so we don't want to see someone else suffering. And so I know people have said this to me, well, why don't you just adopt? And adoption might be the pathway to fruitfulness that God has for you and your marriage. But when we throw out those kinds of solutions, or just pray harder, or just relax, or, myriad things that people will say to us, it can actually put more pressure on us. It can be even more hurtful to us. I think before we decide to make suggestions, we should really be in relationship with people. We should really be walking with them. And if the time is right, if the time is appropriate, we can then maybe ask about, have you considered adoption, or, any other way of fruitfulness? But just to be careful of being afraid of that really uncomfortable place, which is standing at the cross with the person, with the couple who is suffering. We try to think of all the things that we should say, or we try to solve their problem, right? And the simplest yet most difficult thing is to just be present with them at the cross. And then I think further is to affirm them and their marriage you guys are a great couple. You have so much to offer to our parish or to our family. Let them know that you don't just see the cross, but you see the person, you see the people, you see the marriage. That's so very important.
Yes. Yeah. And wonderful stuff. Again, much more at springsinthedesert.org as well as springsoflove.org. And I think, a lot of times it's just a struggle to understand for everyone. At least I can speak for myself, just not knowing what to say, even in situations like at a funeral or a wake or something like that. And I think just give us a little advice here. It strikes me as you're talking that to focus on the fact that when it's early on and raw like that, where you can meet them is just, in a place of empathy, right? Maybe even just instead of saying anything, just say, how are you doing? Let them talk. I don't know. Any final words for us?
Just meet them where they are and love them. That's really all. It's that simple and that difficult sometimes.
Wonderful. Yes. Ann Koshute, just outstanding work. So wonderful. This is one of the great blessings of doing this work is finding out about ministries like this, people like Ann Koshute and Kim as well. And just incredible. Dr. Kimberly Henkel. So springsinthedesert.org, springsoflove.org. Share them far and wide. Make use of them. And make sure to also pray for Ann and Kim, their families, their good work. God bless you all.